Morning, everybody. I'm Connor Cape here with Velocity Advisor Group. I'm in the marketing department there. I'm here with Dan Silvert and Wes Boggs, and we are going to talk about leading the future, how to confidently embrace AI and bring your team along. We've got a pretty good group today. So if you guys have questions, please feel free anytime throughout, drop questions into the chat. We'll make sure that Dan and Wes are able to see them and get to them. We'll be able to stop halfway through and answer good questions. We can wait till the end and answer questions, but feel free to flood the inbox with whatever questions or comments that you might have for Dan and Wes. Dan Silvert is a behavioral expert, executive coach, keynote speaker, and author published in 9 languages. As co-founder and partner at Velocity Advisory Group, ranked in Inc. magazine's 5,000 list of fastest growing companies 5 times. Dan has guided hundreds of leaders to greater organizational and career success and trained thousands of sales professionals to increased revenues through the power of deep relationships. And Wes is the VP of Operations and partner at Think Technologies Group, a leading Florida-based technology consulting firm specializing in AI implementation and business process optimization. With over 3 decades of technology industry experience and a unique background combining a BS in psychology from Florida Atlantic University, Go Owls, with extensive technical expertise, Wes brings a distinct perspective to AI adoption and organizational change management. He has become a recognized expert in AI communications and prompt engineering with a proven track record of making complex AI concepts immediately accessible and actionable for business professionals. Dan and Wes, you guys are up. Everybody, enjoy the show and throw your questions in the inbox.
All right. Thank you, Connor. So, Wes and I are excited to have this conversation, and we really want to make it a conversation. I'm sorry, did someone say something? Am I good?
You're good. No,
Okay.
no, we're good, man. I'm excited for this.
So, we want to make this a conversation, not just because we don't want to do death by PowerPoint, although that is one of the reasons we want to do it this way. It's because relevance to AI depends on who you are, where you're at, what your organization is doing. And to the extent that we can answer your questions or engage with you about how you are utilizing AI, how you are not, and why you are and why you're not, we think it becomes a lot more interesting for all of us. So with that, my focus in this talk is going to be on the leadership side, because so go our leaders, our companies follow. So if leaders are being shrewd, smart, engaging, open, transparent about AI, the chances are pretty good that their folks are following in a similar vein. If leaders are very unsure of themselves or don't have a clear strategic plan, and neither is a crime, by the way, there's going to be a lot of confusion within the organization about what's actually going on and what's going to take place. And we all know the fears and the doomers and the dystopian potentials of all of this. You know, are we all going to lose our jobs? Are we all going to live in an age of abundance, that big picture stuff? But what people are really focused is hey, what's my day-to-day going to look like a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now? And hopefully we can really hone in on that. So that will be my focus. Wes, what will be your focus?
So my focus is a couple of different things. One is, as leaders, how do we begin messaging to our staff and our employees about the correct way to use AI, how it should be part of your day-to-day, busting some of the myths. I think there's a lot of fear around AI. I think there's concern over security of your data and what you're doing with that. I think that from the early days, I think a lot of us were introduced to the idea of ChatGPT being, a way that college kids and students were cheating on exams. So there's this thought that it's taking shortcuts, and it's really not. Right? What we're doing today is making people feel comfortable about it, understanding that, hey, this train has left the station. You're either on board or you're going to get left behind. So you need to start thinking about what you're going to do now. Waiting is really not a good plan or a good option. for the longevity of your business or the longevity of your career if you're an employee. So those I think are the areas that I want to focus on. It's a lot of change, right? It's going to be moving fast. So how do we keep up, and how do we help people take those first steps to make sure they don't get left behind?
So with that, Wes, let me just hit you with a practical question. What is the practical path, the how, generally speaking, for organizations? What does crawl, walk, run actually look like?
Yeah, so I think the first thing you've got to do, that crawl step, is you've got to start using the tools. Step one is, if you've got enterprise apps, if you've got a SaaS app, if you've got either Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, if there's AI features in it, you need to explore them. You need to turn them on. You need to start using them. Kick the tires, see what they do for you. It's like any tool that a human would ever use, whether it's a paintbrush or a hammer or a musical instrument. The first time you use it, you're not going to be very good at it, right? So you've got to touch it and feel it and use it in your everyday life for as many things as you can, so that you understand the possibilities. You start to get an idea of what the limits are. You start to figure out how to be better at using it. I recommend, like, start using it in your personal life. Plan a vacation with it. Plan out a meal plan for the week in your shopping list. Use it in health and wellness, right? Lord knows we all get labs back. Everyone has a patient portal. You go to the doctor, he takes a bunch of blood. You come back 4 days later and you look at the patient portal and there's all this stuff and you have no idea what's in there. And who does know is ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, right? They're pretty good at reading these things now. It's one of those fields that they're spectacular at. So just taking those first steps and using it in your personal life and getting used to what it can do. That's like step one. Especially as leaders, we need to understand the limits of the tools and how it's going to affect business processes and employee productivity, so that we can come up with a strategy, right? If we don't know what the tools can do, then it's our ability to strategize around it and make a plan is not there. So that's that first step. So that I think is step one, crawling, right? Walking starts to look like, hey, now that I kind of have an idea of what I can do and I know what the limits are and I've touched the tool and used the tool, now I've got to understand that I need to make that tool available to everyone in my organization to start with, right? If I'm in the Microsoft ecosystem, I'm getting Copilot for everybody. If I'm in the Google Workspace ecosystem, I'm making sure everyone has Gemini. I'm starting to train staff. I'm making them understand that, hey, AI is not an optional part of your job. I want you to be thinking AI first. How can AI help me with my job, my day-to-day functions? How can I do things faster? How can I digest information better? Where can I start getting those productivity gains? And that initial turning on that first tool, especially in your collaboration workspace, becomes really important, because that ties into everything. Whether either system you're in, every email that you have, every file that your ID has access to, every Teams chat, every Google Meet, everything that you have, every document, full text, indexed, and searchable, that's not now available as context for you in your AI tool, right? So you hit Copilot and you start doing searches and you start asking it questions. It can dig through spreadsheets and PowerPoints and PDFs, and your Teams chats and meetings that you've had with clients, and use all of that information to help you make better decisions faster and surface information that you might never find or even know that it's there. So that's that next step. That's walking. Running looks like, now I'm starting to put processes together. I'm rethinking the way that business functions. I'm starting to tie multi-step procedures and processes together, right? So I might have something where I go out and I use a deep research tool to do some market research. And then I take that research and now I'm putting it into a second prompt that's going to generate a list of calls to action that I'm going to build a marketing plan around. And then I'm going to take it to another prompt that's going to figure out based on those calls to action that I created in the last step, and it's going to come up with a content plan and a content schedule, right? And then I'm going to take those to another prompt that's going to start generating that content. And maybe I even have a bit of an agentic thing going on at the end where it's actually posting the content out for me, whether that's, automatically putting it into your Hootsuite account or whatever it happens to be, right? Getting that multi-step process where I'm using AI at each one of those steps, but I've still got a human, right? We're not to the point where I can pull people out of it, right? I have to have a human that's putting the data in that can look at the output and determine, is it good or bad? We all know that AI, with left alone, will come up with hallucinations, make things up. The output that you get might not be good. You might need to tweak it. You might need to reprompt it. You might need to give it more information, right? So that human judgment to move from step 1 to step 2 in the process is always going to be there. And it's the only way you keep it from going off the rails. You get something that has a 90% success rate, but you do it across 5 steps and your 90% turns into 50% effective by the time you get to the end. So keeping the people in the loop is going to be a critical part of the process for a long time. So that's crawl, walk, run at a high level.
So you've reminded me of a conversation we had previously where you talked about 2 of the biggest mistakes that leaders make, and I'll just remind you of our chat. We talked about delegating understanding of AI and also focusing on the tool as opposed to the workflow. So can you elaborate on those 2?
Yeah, I'll start out with focusing on the tool first, because that's probably the most important thing that you can talk about or think about. Everything we talk about and everything we use as part of our practice is tool agnostic, right? I don't really care which model you're using. I care that you're using one, but we want to teach you how to prompt it, how to provide it the context that it needs to get the outputs that you desire, and how to use it, right? Because the tools are going to be changing. We're in the nascent stage of this industry. We don't know who is Alta Vista and who is Google. We don't know which platform is VHS and which one's Betamax. So the last thing you want to do is be making decisions and building processes strictly around a tool, because we may wake up tomorrow and that tool doesn't exist anymore. The last talk we had, we actually joked that, by the time we're done with this, GPT-5 may have come out, and I got done with the talk and GPT-5 had just released, right? And, it changes the way that you think about things, because it's really about the skills in the process. From a leader's perspective, you've got to understand it, right? You can't depend on your people to tell you how the tool works. Everyone has to have that aha moment, right? And everyone who's started to use AI, you get to that magical spot where you give it some context and you ask it a question, and it quickly returns an output that just blows your mind. And you're like, I don't understand how it's able to do what it does. And once you have that magical moment and you get it, then you start to understand, hey, these are the types of things that I might be able to do with this. Right. So a great example in my life, and the reason I've been able to dive into AI as much as I have over the last year is because we had a focus on operationalizing AI at Think. And one of the first things I did is I had to be able to save myself time. And a lot of my job was pre-sales engineering, client discovery calls, putting proposals together and scopes of work and solutions briefs and PowerPoint presentations and quotes. It was an incredible amount of time. And in a larger engagement, it could be a week or 2. So what I've done now is I've got a set of prompts in a process where, I start out, every front end meeting with a client, every discovery meeting is recorded and transcribed by AI. We either use Teams if it's a virtual meeting. If it's in person, I use Fireflies on my phone and I drop it down in front of the client. I'm like, hey, I used to take notes on a yellow notepad, but I split my time between you and my note taking, and I wasn't able to give you full attention. This allows me to pay attention to you. We'll have a better conversation. I'll send you the transcript when you're done. and no one's ever complained about that. So I start out, I've got the transcript now. I come back to the office and I've got a prompt that I feed that transcript in that spits me out all my to-dos and my action items. And it starts to give me, hey, here's the types of solutions that we need to be thinking about for this client. Then I've got another set of prompts that I can actually feed that into that will create me a solutions brief, a labor estimate, and a scope of work. And it'll allow me to interact with it as well. So I can tell it I have a different target, right? Because the way I talk to a business owner versus the way I talk to a CFO versus the way I talk to a director IT is going to be completely different. They have different information needs. So I need to be able to tailor it to them. I used to do that by hand. Right now I've got it in a prompt. And I can give it the level of detail that I want on the output. Do I want that 2-page solutions brief, or am I looking for, a full 12 to 15-page scope of work with a labor estimate and all the dollar figures in it, right? Then after that, I have yet another prompt that I use that generates the skeleton and content for a PowerPoint slide deck. And then after that, I'm still working on the last step to get it into a PowerPoint presentation. I've played around with, Manus and GenSpark and Gamma and a couple of others, but I haven't found a great last step to get me that deck yet. I can get there, but the entire process now I can run through in, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. It used to take up to a week. And I can actually call someone back the next day, be like, hey, I've got everything we need to talk about what next steps are. So if you think about that from a personal time perspective, I've saved so much time, right?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you like really capture something that I think is a paradox. On the one hand, organizations want to have systems and they want people to consistently follow systems in order to achieve, predictable outcomes, right?
Right.
But on the other hand, this AI thing is so decentralized in a way that depending on who you are, you're going to use it differently because you've got different tasks, you've got different responsibilities, you've got different, right? And so which is it? And I guess it's not an either or. I guess it's kind of a messy middle whereby, from my perspective, at Velocity, you want your employees to have enough freedom to experiment about what it is that's unique to each one of them individually, while at the same time not going off the rails, right? And creating chaos and havoc. And how do you suppose an organization should balance that paradox or those opposites? Because if one more thing, if your employees are waiting for the company to tell you how to do it, you're not going to get very far, very fast. You might have
without it.
But on the other hand, if the employees are driving all of it, well, then you're going to have chaos. So what is it? Is there a cheat sheet to finding that middle ground?
I don't know that there's a cheat sheet. I think it's going to be experience and, using someone like us to help you figure it out a little bit, right? To be honest, but what I've done, right? I've got what was a very personal process for me that I've now taken and I've driven out to where I'm just the reviewer in a lot of cases because I've taken this set of prompts and I've documented this process and I've given it to other people so that other people in the organization can do the work that I used to do. And I become a document reviewer at the end and I just look at the output and verify it after they've done the steps that I follow. So the idea being that you get people in key positions in the organization to start using AI to go through this discovery process that like I did. And then you start to codify it into actual written procedures. Like we expect you to use this set of prompts in this order. These are the inputs that you give it. You start with, the Fireflies transcript or a Teams transcript or a Google Meet transcript. And I feed that into the system and the prompt runs and I get an output. I need to check the output and make sure it meets these standards and requirements, right? And then I add more information and I take it to the next prompt. And then I check the output of the other ones. So we want to get to this very proceduralized, controlled process where we have the ability to repeat the process and get the output that we require, that it's not just random. Because AI is non-deterministic, right? So that's kind of the paradox is how do we beat it up and control it and put the guardrails around it and give it the proper context to get to the end that we know we need to get to. The other part of the puzzle, go ahead. I was going to say the other part of the puzzle is like we have people in our organization there's the Einsteins of AI, the Picassos of AI that may be working for us and they don't even know it, right? So there are going to be employees that you can, not double their output and effectiveness. You might 10x a superpower that you don't even realize is working for you. So finding out who those great people are in your organization that have this innate skill to use this tool that you might not realize, and empowering them to share their knowledge and drive it throughout your culture is going to be, you don't want to miss that opportunity. So I think that's why you accept the messy, right? Is you want everyone, the people who are close to the work, that do it every day, that start to use the tool and understand the impact, that are like, hey, this can save me, an hour a day, 2 hours a day, 5 hours a day, right? How much time savings can you get? And you're going to have those individuals that are far, far more effective at using these tools than anyone else. And that's the people that you want to start to empower. Now, they may be the big thinkers and the people who are, dive down the rabbit hole, and you may need to get them some support to wrap the proceduralization around it and get the repeatability going. But, you've got to identify it's a new set of talents, and they're latent. You don't know they're there. And the only way you discover them is to start to use them. So you got to accept the messy to get to where you want to be.
Sounds great. I think along those lines, let's customize right here.
Yeah.
So folks, does anybody have any questions within your organization that you'd like to bounce off of Wes or myself?
I see one from Thomas here that I think is
I was just about to point out that question from Thomas there. If you guys want to take that one on.
Right? Yeah. So there's two sets of tools for AI, right? There's the consumer tools that everyone has seen that I can go out and I can use ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, for free. And in that case, just remember, if it's free, you're probably the product. And that data is definitely at risk. Now, they do the best they can to anonymize it and make it to where they're not exposing anything critical. But in the personal AI space, those tools, I would not trust them with any IP. I would not trust them with financial data. I would not trust them with PII, right? But when you step over to the enterprise and business tools, whether it's Google Workspace, whether it's Microsoft Copilot, whether it's OpenAI with ChatGPT or Anthropic with Claude, when you get the business accounts, either by default, they don't train on your data, which is the stance of Anthropic and Google Workspace. It's also the stance of Microsoft. Or you have the ability to toggle a switch and turn it off and say, don't ever train on my data. Microsoft is probably the most closed ecosystem. If you're in the Microsoft Copilot world, that instance, those training, that data, those large languages are protected and tied in just to your tenant. So that's probably the safest AI environment that you can be in, is the Microsoft Copilot world. Now, you do have the problem that, it's a little bit crippled. It's running GPT-5 now, but you don't have the same system prompt. It feels a little different than using ChatGPT directly.
So Wes, just for clarification for me, if not for anybody else on the call, a corporate account is one thing. As an individual, if you pay $20 a month or $30 a month, is your data protected or not?
In most of the personal plans that you're paying $20 a month, you have a toggle switch that you could turn off. I think with the exception of Google makes it a little difficult. And the paid Gemini individual, like if you use Gemini Pro or Ultra as an individual, you have to turn off your chat history, which I think is pretty hateful. I know I saw a bunch of people on Twitter today hitting up the head of Google's Gemini division, like, come on, man, you got to do better than this. Everyone else gives us a toggle switch where we can just say, hey, don't train on my data. It's going to turn into table stakes. The idea of training on your users' data is turning pretty taboo pretty quickly. So I think we're going to see that catch up. But in the corporate world, I would definitely make sure that I was using the corporate plans, the team plan and enterprise plan, and I would make sure that my people were using that tool. Because if you don't provide them the tool, people are smart. They're going to do what they can to be efficient. They're going to do what they can to, work easier instead of harder. They're going to be using the tools. And the last thing you want to do is not give them a tool that protects your data. That's why I think it's critical to take that first step and get the tools into the hands of all your users as soon as you can.
Okay, great. So Stephen put in a question. I've written internal APIs and automated internal workflows for my business for well over 10 years. What protects my internal code from getting out there in the context of intellectual property? How do I prevent potential patentable workflows from leaking?
So let's address that in two steps. I think where people got the most fright was, I think everyone heard about the Samsung incident, right? That happened, where their source code was supposedly exposed. I'm saying supposedly because it turns out that it really wasn't. Training data is tokenized and, for the most part, anonymized, and it's pattern based, right? AI is today like the world's best autocomplete. And because it's non-deterministic and you can ask it the same question 5 different times and get 5 different answers, the chances that it's spitting up your data, your workflow, your code are extremely low. At the point that I'm using a corporate plan, I'm using Copilot, I'm using, if you're in the dev world, which it sounds like Stephen is based on his question there, if I'm using a corporate plan from Cursor or Windsurf, or I'm using Claude Code, your data is not trained on. So there's really no risk of exposing anything. Your chats are not used to train the models. They store them for you to use, but they're SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. They comply with every one of the certifications that you would ever want for data security at that level, right? OpenAI, Anthropic, Microsoft, Google. I mean, they understand that the corporate world is their customers, and they absolutely are paying attention to it and trying to honor those needs and requirements for data privacy. If they ever mess this up, it's potentially fatal for them, right? So I don't see them doing that. Now, open models, offshore models, I'd be careful, right? I would not give any proprietary data to something like GenSpark or Gamma or something along those lines. I wouldn't be using DeepSeek, right? Unless I was using it through Perplexity with a hosted model or through Azure in their AI studio. There's definitely some concerns in the personal space, but I don't feel that it's as valid a concern in the private space as it used to be. I would call that a myth that should be busted, right? Is the idea that my data is going to get used and trained into the model, because it really doesn't happen. Not today. Now, one of the things that you're seeing, right, and one of the reasons I think you've got Google and Meta having an advantage is, we're out of training data. They've trained on everything that's out there. So the fact that you've got Google and with their YouTube platform, and you've got Meta with Facebook, and you've got Grok with X, which is this endless generation of training data, you better believe the things that you put there are absolutely consumed and used for training. 100%. It's one of the biggest values of these social media platforms that get incredible amounts of content on a regular basis. The data on X is invaluable, right? Its ability to be used for marketing is incredible. Its ability to be used for technical research and to keep up with what's going on in the world. It's a relevant thought leadership happening in real time, and XAI owns that, right? What does that do long term? Don't know, but just know that when you're posting there, you are 100% training a model. So keep that in mind as well.
Okay. Anybody has any other questions in regards to how they're using AI? Please do not hesitate. We want to be as relevant to you as possible. In the meantime, I want to shift a little bit to, gosh, there's so much noise out there about what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. So the latest, which I'm not even sure is the latest, I think it might be recycled, was this founder of Anthropic saying that 50% of all entry-level jobs will be made obsolete within the next 3 to 5 years.
Whew.
Okay.
Got some work to do if they're going to make that happen.
Yeah. So, I want to ask you, like, how much of this is clickbait from your perspective of what you're seeing, not just your personal opinion, but what you're seeing with your clients? Like, because the integration of AI is obviously it's not gonna be a snap of the fingers. Is it
Right.
is it happening more rapidly behind the scenes and they're not talking about it because they don't want to freak people out?
I don't think so.
Or is this are these kinds of proclamations great for ratings or whatever, but they're not as realistic as we're being led to believe?
Yeah, I definitely, Dario from Anthropic he tends to be, I'm going to use the word somewhat dramatic, right? And anytime you hear these guys talking about it, you wonder how much of it is for, the economic advantages that these statements convey upon them, is the way I'm going to put it, right? Versus what the reality is. Because when you get down in the weeds and you look at what's really happening in the space, there are some huge, huge obstacles to overcome. The best agents on the planet today are in the coding and dev world, and they have what's called a horizon, which is how long can the agent function and work
Right.
unattended on its own before it just loses its mind and goes off the rails. And it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes maybe today. And it's extremely specific for a task. Humans need to do hundreds of tasks every day in their job. Agents today, 30-minute time horizon doing one task, and then they lose their mind, right? We're still in the world of 50 first dates, right? Every time you hit enter and start a new conversation with an AI agent, it doesn't know anything. I mean, it's got its training data, but it's like it just woke up. It's a new thing, learning about the world, right? Which is a pain in the butt for us as users of it, because you have to tell it everything every single time, right? So there's two challenges there. One, it wakes up not knowing anything, and you've got to tell it everything every single time. So there is a procedural process thing that you've got to do, is like, hey, I need to figure out, what do I tell AI agents or engines every single time I turn them on, and start codifying that and saving it so that you can have everyone in your organization telling it the same thing for critical data points like company history, or financial records that you're willing to share and use, or a brand style guide, or a color design system, right, that everyone uses, so you start to get some consistency and output. So that time horizon is like the first thing. The second thing is agents don't know how to talk to each other. So there's this idea of this, huge orchestration agent that's going to have, thousands of sub agents running around, telling each other what to do. But today, the reality is, anytime one agent passes data off to another agent, you lose like 60% of your context. It's all of that information you fed into the first agent is lost at the second agent, and then it hands it back, and it's lost 40 to 60% more, right? So the leakage in the system is incredibly high. The plumbing for them to even communicate, talk to each other, there's no standard today. The closest thing we've got is MCP, which is slow and cumbersome, has security issues, doesn't expose the tools that are available to the language very well. They don't know how to use it, right? It's like we are in such a baby stage that, we're in the 1950s with punch cards, literally time sharing compute on the back end, right?
So the counter to that, of course, is that the rate of change is exponential in comparison to previous transformations. So when we see these, when we hear these proclamations, I think it obviously puts a lot of people on edge, right?
Yeah.
So how does an organization, again, it's a paradox. On the one hand, we want them to be genuinely curious. On the other hand, the more curious they are, maybe the more they discover, wow, you know what? My job is at the very least going to change over the next few years. As the deeper I get into this tech, the more I realize the ground I'm standing on might not be as stable as I thought. So how does one handle that from a leadership perspective? I mean, I have my thoughts on that, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I think today, if I'm a worker, the most important job skill I can learn today is how to use these tools. Understand how they work, understand how they apply to my job, understand how they make me, bigger, faster, stronger. How can I execute more effectively? Now that everyone's got access to experts, across every field, the bar is going to be raised. The expectations for job performance are going to go up, right? Because you have access to these tools that, just allow you to quickly get the data you need to start making decisions faster and better. I think that's going to be the biggest thing moving forward is how do I not get left behind? That's the fear that I would have as an employee is, how do I skill up on this stuff? How do I learn this stuff? At the same time, as an employee, this is the thing that could make us not have to work as much or as hard to get the output that we need. Maybe we can get to spend some more time with our families, get done with work at 5 o'clock instead of, 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, and not have to work weekends. It's our opportunity to maybe solve some of humanity's big problems. And I just saw last week that, there's some new antibiotics that were created by AI that treat both the drug-resistant MRSA and I think it was drug-resistant either gonorrhea or syphilis that they've never been able to do before that AI figured out. Right, the stuff that's going on in the world of protein folding and some of the I mean, just this week we saw something with some mRNA vaccines that had been targeted to the specific genes in an individual that were curing pancreatic cancer or at least putting people into remission. Using these tools is going to allow us to do these next great things. As leaders, we've got to figure out, how do we fulfill our responsibilities to our employees to, keep them employed and, move the organization forward, give them opportunities to learn. Yeah, it's a lot to consider. Did we just lose Dan? I think we might have lost Dan.
Yes, he was having some glitchy stuff, so he's going to log off and log back on. So hi, everyone. I'm the marketing director at Velocity. I'm hopping in for a second.
Hi, Abby.
Hi. Yeah, so we've been having some good questions in the chat. So I'll toss those up while we're waiting for Dan to come back. And one of them I actually put in the chat, but can you explain a little bit more about what agentic AI is versus what most people think of AI with ChatGPT and Gemini and some of those more like basic, I guess, systems?
Yeah, so let's tackle the easy one first, which is, just chatting with an AI bot, right? That is just you having a conversation. And hopefully learning that iteration, it works fantastic with AI, right? The more you talk to it, the deeper the conversation gets, the more information that you give it, the better it gets, right? And you can use chat-based AI to do some pretty incredible things. Back to the Fireflies thing, I've become much better at my job because one of the first things I do when I get back to the office is I take that Fireflies transcript or the Teams transcript. And my buddy's Claude from Anthropic. He's my favorite model today. And that might change at some point in the future, but he's still my guy. And I ask it, hey, how did I do? Right? How could I be more effective? Like I talk a lot. So, I've been actively working on reducing my talk time and discovery calls. And I've gone from, 70% down to the end of the 30s. And it's purely from coaching that I've gotten from AI. So that's the call it the traditional use of AI. When we're talking about agentic use, and I'm going to use the development world with something like Claude Code or Cursor, this is where you're giving it a set of tasks to do and kind of turning it loose. Like, hey, and it can, you might have heard the term vibe coding, right? Where people are saying like, hey, make me an app to track my workout routines and food intake. And you hit enter and, something like Lovable comes back, 5 minutes later, and you've got an app for your iPhone fully written and fleshed out that does these things. It might not be the prettiest thing. It might have some bugs, right? It might need some work before it's something that's truly useful. But that idea that, AI can solve a problem and think and take steps and make a plan and execute something is that's the agentic side of it, right? It might be something in customer service, like if you've called some of the airlines lately and you're like, hey, I need to reschedule my flight. And it goes out and it searches, it finds the flights available. It knows what you're, where you're going and where you're starting. And it starts to give you options and finds things that are available. Same kind of thing that you're seeing, with bank accounts and, the AI agents that sit on websites that can answer questions and can go in and, look up your orders and, interact with other systems and then come back and make decisions and present you with information. That's what we're talking about with the agentic world. With, the nirvana being, an agent replaces a person, but that's far, far away. Agents are today that are effective. Like I said, they can last about 30 minutes and they're very, very task specific oriented stuff.
Yep. Cool. Thank you. Well, Dan's back. I'm going to drop one more question and then I'm going to drop off, and then we're almost towards the end. So if anyone on the webinar, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat so that Wes and Dan can get to them. But before I go, what are the most common prompt mistakes you see beginners make that increase the likelihood of these hallucinations? And how can you restructure prompts to get more reliable outputs? And how do you build your prompts? Those sorts of things.
So I think probably the most common beginner mistake is they treat a chat interaction with AI like a Google search, right? They don't give it enough information. They're non-specific. AI is going to do exactly what you tell it to do, especially some of the newer models. Like if you're using GPT-5, it is what they call extremely compliant with what you tell it. So what you need to do from a prompt engineering standpoint is be more specific, give it more data, right? I want you to give me, like the perfect example when I talked about my sales process. I want you to write me a solutions brief for this client. My target is the CFO of, Country Club in South Florida. I want it output is in a bulleted list. I need summary tables. I need these things. I want to make sure that you don't do X and Y. I want to make sure that when you get to the end that you check your work. I want you to explain your thoughts and your reasoning and how you came to conclusions. If you made any assumptions, I want you to tell me what they were. If you used any sources to pull in numbers or referenced any studies, I want the link to them in line so that I can review them. Just those simple things of wrapping some more structure around what your expectations are will far improve your output from a prompt. The idea that you ask it to, anytime it makes an assumption, to tell you, that you tell it to check its work, that before it begins its answer, that it reviews everything and makes sure that it didn't make any mistakes, right? The pulling in the citations and making sure that it gives them to you so that you can check it is incredibly important. I don't have any prompts that I do that I don't have some rules wrapped around citations. I require, last 2 years from a credible source, and I need the link and I want to look at it. Otherwise, you might end up in a really embarrassing situation where it made up a study by someone that doesn't exist with stuff that doesn't exist. I saw something on Twitter just today talking about some guy was writing code and it had made up some API for Salesforce that doesn't exist, and it had written entire functions against an API that doesn't exist. It made it up from scratch. Right? That's not going to be very useful to you, right?
No.
So the hallucinations are a real thing. It's something that everyone on the model side realizes is a real thing. It was one of the huge focuses on GPT-5. The hallucination rate went from about 6 or 7% down to about 0.4. So people realize, and by people I mean Anthropic, OpenAI, and our friends at Google, realize that they've got to do better at this, that they can't be making stuff up. Not if the tool's going to get used for real business. But at the same time, as a prompt engineer and dealing with the context that you give them, the way you ask the questions, there are absolutely things that you can do that greatly reduce the likelihood of you getting a hallucination.
Okay, thank you for that. Connor, do we have any other? Unfortunately, I'm on my phone here, so I can't see the chat. Do we have any other
Yeah,
questions?
Dan, we actually have a question for you specifically, Dan. What are some of the best ways to get your team on board if they're more resistant to AI or tech changes?
Um, I think, and you can do this either one-on-one or in a group setting, of course, but get real. Talk to them about how they actually feel using this technology. For example, I work with a number of people who, for them, the hallucination is a huge issue. It's like, why would I invest my time in this technology if there's a 3 or 6 or 10 or 20% chance in their minds that the data is not going to be to my standard. And I think that's a bit of a crutch because, as we all know, AI is not getting any dumber. Although when GPT-5 came out, I think a lot of people actually did accuse it of getting dumber,
Right.
and I think that's a whole nother topic, and that might have even been by design, by the way. The deeper
Yes.
you get into that, right?
Right.
So whatever somebody's issues are, for example, if you're extremely task oriented, you might say, I don't have time for this. I don't have time to devote myself to learning this. I have things to do, and that becomes a crutch. Or the hallucination is a crutch. Or simply wading into shallow or deep waters that are just ambiguous to you. Like, what does this mean? Where is this going? What does it mean for me? I'd rather avoid that and do the next thing under my nose. Whatever is holding someone back from experimenting and exploring in this technology is something that a leader should care about. That the only way a leader can actually care is to create a safe environment to have those conversations. What's your biggest fear? Well, my biggest fear is I'm going to lose my job. Okay, well, if that's your fear, what is the fear you have if you remain ignorant to AI as it progresses? Talk to me about that fear. Like, okay, well, if is ignorance to AI going to improve your chances of not losing your job or improve your chances of actually losing your job? Are you creating a self-fulfilling prophecy? Have those conversations, because what's holding people back is emotional, and what's holding them back is psychological. And yes, if you're a leader, sometimes you have to wade in those waters. You can't just direct people. So that's a brief way of looking at it, because I know we're bumping up against time here.
Yeah, we are getting close to the end of time. We got a few more minutes left though. So if anybody has any last minute questions, please throw them in. But one thing for both of you that you can each take your turn um, answering here is, what would be, for the audience here, your one big takeaway? What should everyone walk away from this conversation, either knowing or taking away and going and researching themselves?
I'll open. Um, each of us needs to own this. You have to own it the way you own your phone. No one has to teach you how to use your phone. And you didn't learn how to use your phone at work. As Wes said earlier, you learned that, obviously you learned it in your personal life, and then you bring it to work. AI is no different. If you don't own this, yes, you will be washed right out of your organization. Is that harsh? Yes, it is. But imagine living in the modern world without a phone. So that's what we're talking about. So the more you own it, the more you're going to be able to navigate these times with grace and expertise.
Yeah, I think my one thing would be, don't be afraid and start today. Right? If you haven't started, you got to get going, because this is moving fast. You know, they're not spending trillions of dollars on infrastructure so people can write better emails. So the implications long term for both an organization that chooses to ignore this, or for an individual that chooses to ignore this are not good, right? So get out in front of it. Take advantage of, an opportunity to be an early adopter and, get the economic advantages that you might have. I mean, I don't know if anyone has seen some of the crazy salaries going on in the high-end AI world, but, there's some guys from OpenAI that Mark Zuckerberg offered $1 billion for 4 years worth of work, and they said no, right? You're seeing, research engineers get paid more than professional athletes, which is just absolutely bonkers. OpenAI said they're going to spend $1 trillion in the next 2 or 3 years on infrastructure. It's
Yeah, Wes, I actually have a
truly
question
insane.
about that one.
Yeah,
When it comes to like $1 billion over 4 years, why would somebody say no to that?
because they think they're going to have more economic advantage where they're at, because they're somewhere that they feel is more morally aligned with their compass on where they're going, right? That's really it's got to be a pretty personal decision, or how much money is enough money, right? Could be going on there.
Right. It makes me think the bigger picture is probably not being seen by most of us on the ground level. The bigger picture is bigger than we can almost conceptualize. I mean, like you alluded to a moment ago, they're not spending all this money on the data centers and the training and all these advances just for no reason or just to craft better emails. There is a bigger picture out there. Um,
Yeah.
Dan and Wes, thanks guys for taking the time. If you guys out there enjoyed this, or you have more questions, or you want to dive deeper with Wes, Wes would love to talk to you personally about AI. So scan that QR code, or Abby just posted a link in the chat as well. And then if you liked what you heard from Dan, which I know I did, you can go to velocityadvisorygroup.com. You can go to thinktechnologiesgroup.com. Be sure to scan that QR code, click the link that Abby posted, get some one-on-one time with Wes. It is complimentary. Learn more about this because, I mean, Wes, you made me think with the start today, which I started a couple years ago when this started coming out and this started ramping up. I started back then using ChatGPT in my personal life. I think the first thing I asked it to do was a workout plan and a meal plan, and went from there. And so, even though I started back then, I still feel a sense of urgency, maybe a fire under my butt to keep going and to
Yeah,
try to keep doing more and more. So thanks for taking the time, Wes and Dan.
absolutely.
You keep coming in and out of here, but thank you, Dan, for also taking the time. There's Dan. And thanks everyone for joining us. We hope that you do take advantage of some time with Wes and take advantage of some of Velocity's offerings as well. So click those links, scan those QR codes. Everybody, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.